Hi, everyone. This is the second episode of My Two Cents with your host, Two Cents Girl. You may know me from the past as Two Cents Guy, but since having come out as a trans woman, I don't like to go by that particular name anymore. For this episode, we will be responding to and breaking down What If Lux Aeterna Was on Kill 'Em All by Finn Smith. This isn't really just a reaction video, but rather I wanted to listen to the video once and kind of give my impressions as the song is playing. And then after that, talk about it a little bit more before doing a second listen and breaking things down bit by bit and maybe going a little more in depth. So without further ado, let's get that going. So right off the bat, the guitar tone and the drums sound very similar to the original album. A bit more sawtooth if you listen to that held guitar note. Very tom heavy, like Lars's drum style is much more tom heavy. There's no snare here at all. It's just toms. Then the snare starts. Sort of a crunchy sawtooth guitar tone. It's faster. The lyrics don't really sound like James as he did when he was younger. He had a tendency to scream. These almost sound like someone just raised the pitch, and it doesn't really translate very well. But honestly, I think it works. Like, overall, the whole song works. The lyrics sound a little funny, but I listen to Van Halen, I listen to Merciful Fate, so whatever. I honestly think if they were going to do this right, though, they should have someone come in and do a recording. Because I still can't understand what James is saying. Because it's literally the same vocal track, but it's just raised. The pitch has been raised. Okay, this is good. Yeah, there you go. You got that sort of pentatonic riff. Those double stops are much more aggressive, much more of a Kirk style from the 80s. Yeah. Perfect. Much better. I like that pause. Yeah, I guess the only thing that I really don't like about this, and it has less to do with Finn's production, is just the vocal track, largely because it's the original with the pitch raised. And I feel like if that had been re-recorded so it meshed better with this, I think this would be a perfectly fine What If. Nice double kick at the end there. Yeah, okay, this is a breakdown. Yes, much better. Yeah, because you see how they kind of jump into that breakdown, and it sounds like the studio recording, but then they keep breaking down, and then they end the song with it. So let's just listen to that again real quick here. All right, guys. And they keep going. Tom roll. Keep going. Yeah, much better. So the breakdown style is actually much more on par with what they would do in the old days, and they just ride it through until the end. So that was good. And when they do it in the studio version of Lux Aeterna by Metallica, the way that Metallica does it, where they kind of break down, they pick up the song again, and then they kind of end. And it doesn't really work. It's kind of like a teeter-totter, whereas here it just keeps going, 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 end. And it's like a bomb dropping. And that's how it should be, I think. Honestly, yeah, that sounded really, really good. Just in terms of these types of things, nailing the guitar tone, nailing the drum sound. I didn't really notice the bass, if I'm being honest, and I'm not sure. I'd have to listen to it again to really pinpoint if there really was even audible bass. But honestly, mostly what I heard was James's voice, the guitars, and the drums. That's what leapt out at me, anyways. And even on the original Kill 'Em All recording, Cliff is audible. So I have to wonder if, I don't think the stem tracks for this single would even be available yet, but so someone would have to take the bass and record it themselves. So it sounded like this person just did the guitar track, but honestly, it sounded fine. Yeah, no complaints. And they didn't just change the sound of things, and they didn't just play things note for note. Like, there's some dynamic changes, some style changes. The drums sound totally different because, again, Lars opens with the tom roll, the toms instead of the snare. And that's very much on par with how a song like Whiplash might play out, or a song like Motor Breath. So that's cool. When people say that Lux Aeterna, hey, this sounds like Kill 'Em All, the studio recording of Lux Aeterna really didn't sound very much like Kill 'Em All. Period. It sounded like it had like maybe a suggestion of it, whereas this is much more full on, full bore. This sounded a lot more like Kill 'Em All. The sound, the playing style, the composition, the breakdown at the end. So that was cool, honestly. Not really, I guess, a lot of things other than that I can say about it, except re-record the vocals, maybe make the bass a little bit more prominent, just so we can hear it, because it didn't really leap out at me, and you'd have a real winner here in terms of just a complete rework of the song. I guess what I want to do now is listen to it again and just talk about it bit by bit, and just see if there's anything that leaps out at me that I didn't notice the first time around. So let's do that. Get the mouse out of the way. Okay, now, to be honest, yeah, the snare is playing there. I didn't say that before, so da 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 da, and then snare, 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 snare. So the snare is playing, but they're playing with the guitar. And then when they're holding that guitar sound, and then it's just pure toms. Whereas in the original recording by Metallica, he keeps using the snare, if I'm not mistaken, the snare and the double kick. And you can hear that bump, that single kind of like kick from Lars intermittently in this version, but he's not doing the steady snare, double bass kind of pattern that he's doing in that song. Instead, it's a kick every so often, and then largely toms. So definitely a difference in drumming there. And this sounds much more authentically Kill 'Em All, I think, based off the songs that they actually wrote for that album. I like that whump whump before he starts off in earnest. It has kind of a loose, bluesy approach to it. Almost kind of a dry sort of tone, very sharp, and pushed fully to the left. In the way that, pow, you have like that single, like, sort of like crash from the cymbals, and it's mostly just the toms and the guitar, and I like it. And then the snare starts playing. The snare is much more center in the mix to kick things off. And then on the right side of the mix, this is very much, the recording approach of the period, where it would be from the left, from the right, or in the middle, that kind of thing. And very much how Metallica would record their music in this period, so that's cool. Nice attention to detail. And it's honestly something that they did on the studio recording, but here it just feels a lot more noticeable, I think. Like, the instruments feel more discrete from each other, less of a live recording, and more of, you can hear the individual instruments, but it still sounds good. It sounds pretty authentic. Okay, I can hear the bass a little bit. It's playing, underneath, everything else, and it's audible, but it's very faint. But I can hear it, and the only reason I can hear it though is because I'm like straining, and I'm like, okay, can we hear the bass while the rest of this is going? And honestly, everything else sounds fine. This, if I had heard this like on the radio or saw this on YouTube, I would have been smiling from ear to ear. Like, so far, this sounds really good. And I think part of the problem I have isn't just the sound of the vocals, but also the lyrics themselves. Like, the way that James would have written this song back in the day, he wouldn't have written the lyrics the same way. And he would have had a different rhyming scheme, and his singing approach would have been different. And we're not just talking about the pitch of his voice, but also the way that he would stress things. And he had a tendency to sound angrier, more pissed off. So you can't just raise the pitch. And you couldn't even just hire a singer to sound like young James, but you would also have to rewrite the lyrics too. Here they're kind of sing-songy, kind of rhymey. And that's something that came a bit later in James's career. He started doing it more, especially in Master of Puppets a little bit, and Justice for All somewhat, but then in the 90s in particular. So the lyrics sound like they were written later in James's career. So if you really wanted to do the job right, hire someone to not only sound like young James in terms of how you sing, so not just the pitch of your voice, but the way that you're articulating everything, the way that you're screaming, sound pissed off. Like, he had a very trademark kind of like snarl, scream almost. And like, there was a bit of restraint. And I guess fun fact about James, like in the early days, he actually tried to sound more like the singer from Diamond Head, and more of a crooning approach. And then when he broke out, the band broke out into more of what we think of as early Metallica, his singing approach totally changed. So I think with the way that they did sound back in 1983, though, you'd have to actually coach the singer and be like, okay, avoid all those things that James does in the 90s, that Kool-Aid man approach to things where he's like, oh yeah, and he, as opposed to just straight up like screaming, but then rewriting the lyrics too. So it's just hard for me to, I don't want to be too harsh on this though, because I know that most of the work went into the guitars, and then to a lesser extent like the drums and stuff like that, and the samples all sound really good, and the guitars sound fabulous, and the composition is really nice. So I don't want to be too rough on the rest of this, because I feel like this is just kind of like a thought experiment, really. But if you were to put more of a serious effort into the vocals, I would rewrite the lyrics too. And I haven't seen anyone do that. Everyone's always taking the lyrics that James writes, and they keep them exactly the same. And I'm like, why does nobody actually change the verses that he's singing to try and make them sound more like young Metallica? That would be really interesting. Nobody does that though. I like that three-dimensional kind of tom thing. I can hear the bass a little bit. It's such a rough sounding guitar, just sort of rough and sharp, sawtooth, a bit of crunch, a bit of sharpness, very much vintage. And I think everything is balanced really well in terms of the mix too. Like the guitar doesn't clash with the drums. The vocals aren't too quiet. The bass is a little quiet. I can hear it, but that's kind of standard for how Cliff was recorded on the album. Like you can hear him a little bit more on the original mix, I think, than something like this. But it's still it's audible, you know. And I think that's actually one of my favorite sayings from the original song was "full speed or nothing." It actually kind of reminds me of the lyrics to Motor Breath, where "full speed or nothing." Actually, I think was a line from the original song. I can't remember the exact verse off the top of my head, but um, what's the use for living unless you're living fast, like that kind of thing. And it's all about this fast, aggressive kind of style. And I think lyrically, that's the one part of the song that I liked from the original studio recording. But also here, I think it works well with that Kill 'Em All sound. Like just lyrically, if you weren't going to change anything else about James's actual words that he wrote for the song, I would keep "Full Speed or Nothing." And everything else, though, I would probably tweak or change, honestly, just for fun. And this is definitely a new addition. I don't think they had this pentatonic kind of riff. I like how the solo kind of cuts James off. I don't think that happened in the original. Maybe it did. It works well here, though. And the solo, in order to flesh it out, they've lifted notes from the original Kill 'Em All record, and that's a pretty common thing. But it works well here. It sounds good. More importantly, it sounds like a full guitar solo, and it flows. You know, it's not like he's stopping every other bar to try something completely different. It feels cohesive. Also, it sounds like Kirk. You know, Kirk actually could solo once upon a time, so and I don't think this solo is really that technically demanding from a metal standpoint, but it fits better with the music. I guess there really isn't that much else to say. I mean, that the song closes out and the breakdown works really well. But yeah, honestly, I think this is cool. Yeah, if anything, Finn, the only thing that I would change is if you could find someone to collab with just to do the vocals. And if you do the vocals, maybe try and rewrite the lyrics to go along with it, just to make it try something a bit novel, because nobody does that. Nobody ever fucks around with James's lyrics. They treat it like it's like holy scripture or something. And it's like, no, change it a little bit. See if it sounds a little different lyrically. Get poetic. But yeah, just have a vocalist, sing the way that James would have sung, but then write lyrics the way James would have back then. And I think, honestly, this would be, this is up there with some of the other ones that I really like by like Creeble Star or Bryce Barilla. I think he really nailed it. Nice work.